Hi boys and girls, this is Mrs. Nicholas. We're gonna be painting some turtles on the beach together, crawling into the ocean. And I have slightly different supplies as you guys this time around. If you painted in the last cookies and canvases, I kind of gave back all of my extra paint. So my paint might look a little bit different. It looks really messy on here, but that's okay. So these are the colors that I'm gonna be using. Feel free to change colors, to suit your picture. You do not have to use the exact same colors as I do for my painting. I'm using both light and dark blue. If you don't have both of those, you can just add a little bit of black to to a little pile of blue to make a darker blue. I have black and white, I have brown, I have a little bit of orange. This is called yellow oxide. If you don't have that, you can mix a little bit of yellow and brown to make that. And then also green, of course, because like I said, we are painting turtles. So I will end up needing a darker green as well. So I might end up mixing a little bit of green and brown at some point. So just so you know what I have a few different kinds of brushes. I know I had the same brushes as what you could purchase for the cookies and canvases, but I gave those back too. So I have just some art room brushes, so all different sizes, and then a bucket of water and some paper towels. So once you guys have all of your supplies ready to go, we can get started. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a pencil on my canvas and I'm going to determine where I want. I'm gonna have one corner be ocean and the other corner be sand, be the beach. And so I'm gonna start off just kind of making a wavy line, and yours can go anywhere that you want. And like I said, up here we're gonna paint the water, here we're gonna paint the sand. Now the water's gonna be blue, the sand is going to be this yellow ochre. And so blue and yellow, if you mix them together, you guys know, you should know at least, that you make the color green. And I'm not interested in making green where those two things overlap. So we're gonna have to be pretty careful where they come to meet here on this line. Okay, so now that I have my line, I'm gonna start with one of my biggest brushes, and I'm gonna start on the sand side first. I need the sand to be dry the fastest so that I can get to adding turtles there. So I don't really care if the water takes a while to dry. So that's why I'm gonna start down on the sand side. I'm just gonna get the tiniest bit of water on my brush just to make it just a little bit of wet, even getting rid of the excess water there. And here we go on the sand. I'm just gonna do one layer of this yellow oxide. And again, if you guys don't have this color, if all you have is regular yellow, that works. Regular, just yellow will look awesome. If you would like to try to mix something like this color, you can mix yellow and brown together, and you can get something like this yellow oxide. You can mix it on your plate and then paint it on your canvas if you'd like, or you can blend those colors together as you're painting on your canvas. That works too. I don't want to leave any chunks of paint, so I want to kind of smooth it out as I go. And when we're painting such a large area like this, think about your brush strokes. Artists use all different kinds of brush strokes in their paintings, and you might want all of your brush strokes to go the same way, right? You might want them to kind of like go back and forth, right to left, or maybe you want them to mostly go up and down, or maybe you want them to be all crazy and leave kind of like a texture in the sand, and that's fine too. So, you could even dab the brush like this on the surface of the sand to kind of leave a little bit of a texture if you like that. So just kind of giving you some options for different things that you can do, but I am just going to smooth this out. And I think that looks pretty good. So once you're done with that, I'm gonna clean my brush. Remember that acrylic paint, if you don't know this, acrylic paint, if you leave it dry on your brushes, it will ruin the brush. So you always wanna make sure that you rinse out your brushes really, really well. So I'm bouncing this brush off the bottom of the water container and getting it super, super clean. And then I'm going to dry it here on the paper towel. When you're all done, it would be a good idea maybe to even wash the bristles out with soap, because if the paint dries in there, unfortunately, it does ruin the brush. All right, now let's move on to the water. So this is the surf right here, right, where the waves kind of crash up onto the sand. So when you're painting the ocean, you think about the ocean in terms of value, or remember, that's how light or dark a color is. When you're thinking about that, think about how as the ocean gets deeper, it gets darker in appearance. So I'm going to start with a darker blue up in this farthest corner, and I'm going to get lighter as I get up here, and then I might even add some like white to make the surf look, you know how it looks like foamy and white a little bit. So you could do that too. Now I have to be careful and sure that this yellow oxide is dry for the sand before I go right up against it. So I might kind of avoid that area just for a little bit. So I'm going to start in this far corner with my darker blue. And if you want to get fancy and like put in a few streaks of black in there, or even purple, you might want to make your ocean have a tinge of green. The ocean can appear a few different colors depending on, which ocean or how the weather is that day. So feel free to get fancy with yours. And if you feel like your paint isn't blending, but you have enough there, you can just do like one quick dunk in the water. And not get a whole lot of water, but just a little bit to help it just blend a little bit further. And I'm using another big brush, a wider brush, and think about it, if you're painting a big area, you want to use a bigger brush. If you're painting a smaller area, you probably want to use a smaller brush. Okay, I'm also going to streak in a little bit of black. Now I dabbed a little bit of black paint on the end of my brush here, but it is the tiniest amount, and I even think I got too much. I'm gonna get the rest of it off of there, and the reason why is because black is the most powerful of all of the colors. And so if you get too much in there, it will overtake your blue because it is super strong. Now I'm gonna leave a little bit of this darker blue out here. I'm not gonna blend it entirely. I'm just gonna kind of streak it and let it dry like that. And now that I really like the way that looks up there in the corner. So I'm gonna start moving down here to this section with the lighter blue. And so I'm blending with the darker blue. And then I'm even just gonna get some white on my brush and kind of start blending that in. I'm making a tint. It's called a tint of blue. A tint is any color plus white. And I'm just going right up against this, but I'm not overlapping them just yet. I think I'll go back and touch that up a little bit once the sand is a little bit more dry, but I don't want to have green sand at this time, so I'm really being careful just to kind of go up against the edge of it, but I don't want those two to blend. Now I'm gonna go in and add a little bit of white paint right on top, kind of blending, but also leaving some of it behind, just in that wherever I painted it. Just leave like some painterly like brush strokes. Think about all of the waves and lines in the ocean, in the waves, in the water. You know, so leaving unblended brush strokes here actually really makes it look very natural and more realistic. So, you know, again, feel free to make this in a style that works for you. You do not have to make yours look like exactly like mine, but you know, you don't have to blend every single stroke of paint completely. Sometimes not blending actually is really cool. Oh, I got a little bit of yellow in my water. That's okay. Try to make it work for me. I just added some white over top. Tried to hide it a little bit. Just a little bit more white in this one area. And I'm pretty happy with the water. I might not even have to go back and touch it up. Okay, so at this time, if your sand is still wet, you're gonna want to wait until it dries before we start adding the turtles on top of the sand. So I am just gonna pause the video here for 1 second. I'm actually gonna go use a hair dryer, which you could do the same thing at home if that works for you, if you have one available to you. All right, so I'm back. I dried my canvas. Now my water is a little bit wet still, but I'm not adding anything on top of that. I'm not layering anything over that, so I can just leave that to dry on its own. But I did make sure that I dried the sand because I'm gonna add turtles on top of that. And you can tell that acrylic paint is dry, or at least the kind of acrylic paint that we're using here. Most acrylic paint dries dull. So once it's not shiny anymore, that typically means that it's wet. So if you're trying to wait, like I can see there's a little shiny patch up here. So I know that that area is wet. I'm gonna stay away from that area. I'm not gonna draw up there anyways. Okay, so for my painting, I am going to be adding 3 turtles, 3 sea turtles. So feel free to add 1, 2, 10 sea turtles. Remember, this is your artwork, so no need to make yours match mine exactly. You should make this how you want to make it, you know, in a way that you really like it. Yeah, so let's get started on that. So the first thing that we're gonna do, I have a pencil. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. I do have a pencil. You might need an eraser too, but I suggest that you just draw super, super lightly. And hopefully if you make a mistake, you can cover it up with paint. But if you can't, if you don't paint the turtle right over top, you could still cover it up with like more yellow with the sand. Okay, so I'm gonna make 1 big turtle here, 1 medium turtle here, and then a little guy back here. Okay, so I'm gonna try to just kind of space these out. I left a nice big space. So I'm going to just draw an oval very, very lightly. So bigger on the top, think about an egg shape. Bigger on the top, smaller on the bottom. And you know, I've seen all different kinds of shapes of turtles that people have drawn and or painted. So, you know, feel free to make yours look like how you want to. Maybe you go hop on the internet and you find a picture of a turtle that you think is really cool and you make it look a little bit different than mine. Okay, so I just added the head on that too. I don't know how well that's visible in the video, but there's my one. So I'm just doing the outline of things. I just drew the outline of the body and the head. Before I add on the arms, I'm gonna make sure I position my other one so that the arms don't run into each other. So I'm gonna do my other one here. And then my third one, the little guy. And feel free to have them go right up to the edge. You can even have them go off the edge a little bit and just draw part of one. It's totally fine. There's not any right or wrong way to position them on here. It's just as long as you like how you position them. That's what you're going for. So all my ovals are different. I'm not really worried about that. So right now I have my two bigger turtles, and then I have the little turtle, and now I just have the heads on them as well. And I'm gonna start adding their legs or flippers, and I don't know if I'm gonna really add a tail on. Feel free to do whatever works for you though. Like little fins. Typically, that it seems like the pictures that I've looked at, their fins look like they get smaller as they go closer to the body, wider in the middle, and then out towards not exactly a point, but they just kind of get skinnier there. And remember, they're supposed to look like they're moving towards the water, so you know, they can be in all different positions. They don't all have to look the same. They can all look different. I think that's actually going to make it look more realistic. All right, so I have my three turtles all sketched out on there. Hopefully you can see those outlines. And I'm going to start, so we're layering our paint just kind of like we did with the ocean, right? We were kind of layering and building it up. We're gonna start with green, a darker green for the shells, and then a lighter green for the heads and the fins. I'm gonna mix in some of my yellow oxide and my green together to make that lighter green. Blend those two together. So it made like a yellow green, you can see that. And I love that. And I'm gonna use a little bit of both of those. Switch brush sizes here. I'm gonna start painting I am gonna use this brush actually. I'm gonna start painting the fins first. I just had paint all up on all sides of it. And sometimes that can get like a little messy, a little bit out of control. So I cleaned off my brush. I still think I'm gonna use this one now. And if you're painting yours and you're like, oh man, you know, whatever brush, if it's too big for a smaller fin like this, just size down your brushes so that it works for you. Remember, smaller area, smaller brush. So when I'm painting these fins, I'm not so worried about bringing the lighter green paint onto the shell because I'm going to paint darker green there too. So, you know, I'm trying to get the outline of them. I want to go outside the little outline that I drew too much. I mean, you know, you can change it a little bit as you go if you'd like, make it a little bit bigger. But once I get into the shell, I'm just kind of like brushing it in there because like I said, I'm going to be painting the darker green in those spots. So acrylic paint is really a lot about layers, building up layers, letting those under layers dry, adding other layers on top. And then, you know, these are like the base layers of the turtle, and eventually we'll get to even those tiny little details. I screwed up this foot over here, back leg. That is okay. I am gonna just go with the flow. Figured it out. I will probably be, if I wouldn't have said that, you guys probably never would notice anything wrong with it. So remember that. If it doesn't turn out how you planned, it's not always a bad thing, right? Just like Bob Ross says, a happy little accident. All right, I'm also going to do all the heads of the turtles in this lighter green. All right, so while that dries, I'm gonna go back in, I'm gonna clean my brush, I'm gonna get the darker green on my brush, and I'm gonna paint the dark green base color for all the shells. All right, so I have the first layer of green down now. As I look at this green, you know, it kind of depends on what kind of paint you use, but I can really see through some of the parts of it. I can see the yellow coming up through it. So I'm gonna dry the turtles and then I'm gonna add even more layers on top, okay? All right, and I'm back. I dried the turtles. So now I'm gonna go in with that dark green again and do a second coat on the shells. It's looking a lot more solid now with the second coat. You know, in this green, don't be surprised if your colors dry quite a bit different. The green, look at the difference between the dried green and the wet dark green. Dried a lot darker. Now my turtles, fins and heads with the lighter green, that went on pretty thick. So I do not need to add a second coat on mine, but feel free to do that if you'd like. I'm gonna clean this brush. I'm gonna let these dry, but I'm gonna keep painting other things. And then, you know, if I need to, because obviously we wanna add some details on the shell, but if I need to go and dry them with the hairdryer again, I will, but I may or may not have to. So at this time, I'm gonna go in with a smaller brush. You could take like a flat little brush like this, or maybe a smaller pointier brush. I'm gonna take a flat one and I'm gonna take some of that darker green and I'm just gonna add a few details of lines of the darker green on the fins of all the turtles. Maybe just like a little bit on the edges. Just like a real quick little detail. I added too much on this guy. This is kind of to show, you know, just some dimension to make it look not flat. It's like a little shadow on the side of the fins. Careful not to stick your hand in wet paint while you're doing that. It can be kind of tough. Add some other little lines if you'd like. Next thing, I'm gonna do the same thing on the heads of the turtles, just a little bit on the sides. Do it just a little bit on each side of the turtle's head. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to clean that brush and then I'm going to add the eyes on each turtle. So for this, I'm gonna use black. I'll add a little detail in white. I'm gonna actually change brushes. I'm gonna use a pointy bristle brush for this one. All right, I'm cleaning my brush again. And at this time, I'm really ready to move on to the shell. And I can see the second layer of green isn't dry yet, so I'm gonna go dry that with a hairdryer again, and then we can start on details on the shell. All right, and I'm back. Didn't get them 100% dry, but I think that they're dry enough that I should be able to start on the details on the shell over top of it. So I think what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna mix a little bit of the brown. I accidentally got way too much brown out. And I'm gonna mix some of that orange in with it. I'm just gonna make a little pile of those two colors mixed together. And this is what I was going for there. All right, it's kind of like a burnt orange now. And this paintbrush, it's too big for details, number one. So I definitely use a smaller brush than you may have mixed with. It's easy to mix with a bigger brush, but you know, also the more paint you have on a brush, the less control that you have over that paint. So I definitely would never paint with a brush with paint all over it like that. So just kind of a little tip for you. I'm gonna clean that brush out, set it aside. And then for details, I think I'm gonna use this pointier brush, pointy bristle brush. And I'm gonna take a seat for this. So on the backs of turtles' shells, there's all those, you know, like little shapes for all the little segments of the shell. And a lot of times they are like pentagons or hexagons. And it makes me think of when students ask me for help to draw a soccer ball. I believe those are hexagons. Anyways, the point is they can be very difficult to draw. So here's what I say to that. If you want to get really fancy and you want to draw pentagons and hexagons all pushed together to create the shell of the turtle, go for it. But I would like to keep it kind of simple, so I'm not going to stress over those shapes fitting together in any perfect way and them being like so specific. I suggest that you don't stress over that either, okay? If you would like to draw on what you're going to do first, that's great. I'm just gonna be really brave and I'm gonna go for it. The first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paint on the outline. So I'm just gonna outline around the edge, and I'm using that burnt orange that I mixed. And you know, feel free to start with like your smallest one, your biggest one, whatever you feel the most comfortable with. Obviously, the bigger the shell, probably the more segments you'll have, but not necessarily. You can make them all have the same. All right, so now that I have the outline on that, I don't know how well you can see that in the video, but there it is, okay. I might go back and end up making that a little bit thicker, maybe, maybe not. I'm gonna start on the central shapes and then I'm gonna work my way out. So I'm gonna do one here. And I just kind of started making it. It's not exact, it's not perfect. kind of just thinking about like a soccer ball. I'm just going from, and you could also just think about ovals. You know, you could just make these ovals and then go back and like make them have straighter edges if you wanted. That works too. But this is definitely probably the trickiest detail, but my advice to you is don't stress over it. Whatever you do, it's probably gonna look amazing. So here's what I have so far for those segments, right? I've really started with this one here, and then I expanded down to this one, and then I just kind of like drew lines coming out of the points of those, but like they're two different sizes, you know, so it does not have to be exact. And then if you are like, oh man, I made a mistake, oh no. Okay, here's what I would do. If I made a mistake, like, and I didn't really love the shape, or I wanna kind of touch up the shapes, I'm gonna go back and make them thicker. And by doing that, you could really hide any errors, or, and again, you're just making it look like, hey, I meant to do that. It's also kind of making the shell look even cooler, I think. But let's say you're like not interested in making the shell look like this, you can always look up on Google Images, you know, other ideas for different techniques for how to paint that. I am gonna go back and make the outline of the shell a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker. All right, one turtle shell done. All right, we're gonna add more details to that later to give it even more dimension, but right now I think that that one's good. I'm gonna move on to my second and my third, and painting's crooked in the video. There we go. And get those going the same thing. Start with the outline again. Feel free to not start with the outline. Do what works for you. All right, so I painted my second one, not gonna lie, kind of messed up the bottom, but it doesn't really bother me. I might touch it up with some green, I might not, okay? So don't worry if that happens to you. right, third shell done. I went pretty thick with the paint on those brown lines. I did go back over them, really double up on the layers of paint, because the first layer you could really see the green underneath coming through, and I really didn't want to see that. So, okay, next thing that I'm going to do is in the sand, actually. I'm going to take just a little bit of this burnt orange on my brush, and I'm going to add some movement lines underneath the fins of the turtles. And this is just kind of giving the idea, you could either think of them two ways. One, they could be shadows from them, you know, or like leaving a mark, like an indentation of them in the sand from where they were just crawling from. Or you could think of them as movement lines. I guess they kind of double as both. And a movement line, think about when, you know, you might see a character, like an animated character, like running. Sometimes you see like, you know, like lines behind that character. They really give the impression of the direction of movement. That's the idea for these. If you're not into them, that's okay. You don't have to add them. I'm also going to take a little bit of, I'm going to take a thicker brush now. I'm going to take my brown and I'm going to mix it in with a little bit of the yellow oxide. So tiny bit of brown, tiny bit of yellow oxide. So I'm basically making a slightly darker version of the yellow that I was using. And so if you just started with yellow, you could use yellow and more brown than you did before. And I'm just gonna go in and do like the same kind of thing in the sand, but I might just kind of randomly do it to make the sand look a little bit more textured. And go right up against the turtles. Right up against the water. And I'm not going to put this everywhere. I'm just going to kind of put it in some spots just to add some dimension to, so that, you know, again, so it doesn't look super flat. So the sand looks like maybe somebody walked on it, the wind blew it a little bit. And I don't have a ton of this yellow oxide left on my plate, so I just kind of keep just doing a quick dunk in the water, and that is also going to make it extend a little bit further, but not a ton of water, because you could, if you accidentally got too much, you could start lifting layers of paint underneath with that. You don't want to do that. You don't want to undo all your hard work. I might get a little bit more yellow. This isn't a necessary detail if you're not feeling it. I'm just I'm just having fun. I'm not even at another layer of that on top. All right, so I accidentally painted over one of my movement lines, so I'm gonna touch that sucker up real quick. Probably should have done that sand thing back when I did the sand, but you know, I just thought of it. And now I'm gonna take my smallest brush and we're gonna go in with some details in white. So we're gonna put whites on the eyes, and we're also gonna do some white on different parts of the shells. So here we go. I'm gonna get my brush. I'm just gonna dip it in water, and it's gonna make all the bristles go right to a point because it was looking a little furry there. I'm gonna get some white on my my brush, and I'm actually gonna get a little bit more water and kind of like mix the water and the paint on my plate so that it's easier to, my white that I have is very thick. So I'm just trying to make it a little bit smoother going onto the canvas. So I just blended the tiniest bit of water with the tiniest bit of white, and now I can go in with those details. So I'm just adding a little mark on the eyeballs. And then I'm gonna say that the sun is shining on these cute little turtles from over here, from the left. And so I'm gonna create that idea of value by adding some reflections on the left sides of their shell. So like the top and left of their shell. So I'm just gonna do that on those segments of their shells that would be closest to that side. Right. Okay, so at this time, if there is any more white that you want to add in your ocean, any details that you might need to go back and touch up, you know, really take a second and scan over everything. I definitely painted over part of this fin here, so I'm going to touch that up really quickly. I think everything else I'm pretty happy with. I am going to go back with a little bit of the darker green on some areas. Feel free to do that if you'd like. Add another layer. so I think I am officially done, and I cannot wait to see your turtles. I would love, love, love to see you guys photograph them and put them on Artsonia once you're finished with your paintings so that I can check them out. I hope you had fun painting with me, and that's it. That's the end of the video. Bye, guys.